Liam, welcome to the Inspired by Show.
Now I'm emotional, so well
Oh.
done. I was instantly adopted. My birth mum, she was a drug addict. She had loads of kids. It was a really tough time. And I was like really, really lonely. I was really depressed. The time I almost died from drugs, I took a legal high called like Pandora's Box. It's because I got a Snapchat off a guy who was like sleeping with my girlfriend. It made you feel like you die. You know when you die, they say you see like 7 minutes of your life. I was like feeling that. And somehow I jumped out of the top window of like a 3-story place, didn't break anything, and just like landed on a street. And then I woke up by an ambulance.
Liam, welcome to the Inspired by Show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem. Thank you so much for coming all the way here to the studio. So I've been really excited for us to have this interview because obviously we connected through you having your own podcast as well. So I always love interviewing podcasters because it's quite nice to be sat on the other side of it. Now, for a little bit of context, your podcast is known as the Online Disruptor Podcast with Liam Chick. I'm curious. We hear a lot of the word disruption a lot in our industry. Where did your love for disrupting come from? Let's start there.
So it's a weird story. So I wrote a tweet once, and I would not define myself as a disruptor. It's just a name that sort of caught on. I wrote a tweet that said Ed Matthews and HS Tiki Toki are dangerous to like women of society. They teach men that the way they teach women like is wrong. And it just went mental. Like the amount of abuse from like young kids, but also support from like older people, more mature. It got like 5 million views on Twitter, and Twitter's really hard to get views. So I was like, I am a disruptor. And I was like, yeah, I'm gonna. And I was like looking at starting my podcast at the time. So I was like, that's my name, the Online Disruptor. I disrupted on Twitter. And now I look back at the actual story and I think that's really cringe. But I think the name's caught on, so.
Yeah, clearly. And so you mentioned there that obviously you wouldn't normally call yourself a disruptor. Where did your sort of want for your podcast come from then?
So I use a podcast to be sort of quite clever. Like with like business and football and like connections that I need to gather, like the podcast is a great excuse for that. It's not about like fame. It's not about getting like, obviously Rob Moore once said, if you don't have a podcast, like if you don't get views, you don't have a podcast. He said that once. That's true. But also the more guests you bring on, the better the guests get, and the better the guests get, the better the guests get. So it's all about like connections. Like we've got George Lineker coming on next week. He's obviously the son of Gary Lineker, who we can then try and connect to. So that's really why I started a podcast.
Wow, love that. And I love that you've been on a journey of getting some quite big guests, which is pretty awesome. Take me back to the Liam before the podcast. So what you mentioned there, football, you mentioned business, or tell us about your journey, because I always love finding out people's inspiring stories and the moments that brought them to where they are today.
Yeah, so it's been a long journey. I was born in like, I'll give you an overview and then I'll get to the interesting bit. So I was like born in 98. I was instantly adopted. My birth mum, she was a drug addict. She had loads of kids to gain like government money, government funds. So I was adopted, foster cared. Went to my amazing parents in Exeter who like adopted me, fell out with them really bad, had a lot of fights. So we're skipping here to like 16 now. Went back into the care system in Moss Side in Manchester. Really, really rough area, really tough. Lots of like drugs, violence, stabbing, all that sort of stuff. So as you can imagine, it's not the nicest time. Went back down to Plymouth because obviously I was stabbed. They said this area is not probably not the best area to sort of be in. So went back to Plymouth, spent about a year on like drugs, like heavy drugs. Like it was a really tough time in my life. And something I've never spoken about, like I've briefly spoke about, but now I'm like getting a bit emotional by it. And then went and got an apprenticeship. And that's sort of where my career started. So I never went to school. So I dropped out of school when I was 14 to go on a building site to work. So I haven't got any qualifications. So yeah, that's my overview. And now I'm emotional. So well done.
Thank you. No problem. Well, take your time because this is such an inspiring story. And, you know, a lot of us here of, you know, the stories of people going through shit and coming out on top. But I think hearing it from yourself, like someone who, like you said, like legit before we spoke, you were like, I've never really talked about my story before. And so thank you for sharing it here, first of all, because it's not an easy thing. And I'm sure going through that, you know, what was going through your mind when you look back? Obviously, it's easier now, people say, to look back on situations in hindsight. What was it like for you when you were going through that? So, you know, going through the adoption system, how was that for you? Do you remember much of it?
Yeah, well, the adoption, not so much. I was very young. I was fortunate. Obviously, being with adopted parents, then going back into care, I remember a lot of. And my friends always asked me what it was like. And look, it was a really tough time, of course. Like,
Mm.
I had to like get a massive wardrobe just to like block my door because I was scared someone would come in the night and stab me. It was like there were bars on the window. Like I saw someone genuinely get stabbed to death outside my window once. Like it was so scary, and I wasn't speaking to my parents. I was like so alone. But then weirdly, it was like the best time. Like it was I had the best of fun. Like when I think when you have nothing and like when you lose a lot and when you lose, like my parents are well off, they're privileged. They obviously work really hard, but I'd never had that struggle. I never had struggle really growing up. Obviously, self-inflicted sort of stuff,
Mm.
and the adoption. But they tried to provide everything up until I was like 15, and things went like wrong. Um, but when you sort of lose all of that, that's when you like really find happiness in the smallest of things. Like I could like cook. Like I never cooked up until this point, and then I'd like cook a proper meal. I was like, shit, I've just gone and cooked. I can do this. Like, and I was from Exeter, so there's not a lot there. So I could go to like Blackpool Pleasure Beach. I was like, wow, this is really good fun. I'm going for a walk on the beach. I've never really done this before. And like you just find happiness in stuff that you never knew could make you happy.
Yeah, so powerful. It's interesting as well because, like you say, I think when you've lost everything or you don't have a huge amount, it makes the little things mean so much more, doesn't it? And you know, like you say, I remember when I went through quite a traumatic time in my life where I was severely depressed. And I remember literally my biggest achievement often was going and downstairs to the corner shop to be able to get a pint of milk and coming back up and not having a panic attack, you know. And it's sometimes, I think, if you look back and people think it's the pay rises, it's the big salaries, it's the fancy cars, the big houses, but actually it's often when you've come from nothing or you felt like you've had nothing, sometimes then those achievements, the smallest wins, actually feel so much more powerful.
Yeah, and like my partner's doing very well in life. I've always said that, and she's very well off. Like we're both well off together. Like together, we're
Mm.
really powerful. She is more materialistic, but she's not had this sort of struggle. She would care about the car. She's like, oh, I really want that car. I really want that coat. And I'm like, fair enough. I don't. I literally will wear the same shit every day and be happy because like I know how hard what like I don't know why. Like, I will wear just the same shoes every day, and like, I don't care about things.
Mm.
Like, as long as I'm happy, as long as I'm comfortable. Yeah, there's like being in a really poor council house, sort of comfortable, and then obviously being able to afford to eat properly. That's happiness to me.
Mm.
But like, yeah, I don't care about things I don't need.
Wow. So take me back to the moment. Obviously, you mentioned that you fell out with your adopted parents. You then went back into care. Tell me about what happened there and what got you to here. What did you go through in that point?
So there was a lot of build-ups, like me and my dad, and we get on really well now. Like I love the guy to pieces. Like we've really rekindled, but we were like fighting a lot, like physical fights, like
Mm.
fist fights, like a lot of shouting. And what the like care people said was, actually you've got a young sister. She's getting caught up in this. This isn't fair. So it's either she goes or I go. And I said, I'll go because I'm older. She needs her mum. So then I travel all the way up. They take me there to like Wigan, and yeah, I don't know what to do. I'm like, this is way out of my comfort zone. Like this is massive. So then all that stuff that I've just mentioned happens, and then I move back down to Plymouth, and I apply. Like 6 months go on. I'm spending all like the money I'm getting from on drugs, like, alcohol. And I'm like, yeah, I really need a job now. Because I've always been a hard worker. That's one thing I've much preferred over education is work. And I applied, and I kid you not, and I show people like my job applications. Like I used the government job application site, and I applied, I think it was for 237 jobs, and only one got back. Only one got back, and it was a really cool job. So they invited me for an interview. This was a skill tech in Plymouth, David Bogart. They invited me for an interview, and I was like, I'm never gonna get this. It was apprenticeship. I am never gonna get this, but I'm going. I'm gonna present myself. I'm gonna show what I'm about. And they hired me there and then. And that was like, he was the definitive moment, the changing point in my life. Like I always speak about that guy. Like, and I don't think he realizes how much he actually helped my life, but that's the one I always speak about. And that's like when it changed for me. And then I did a year apprenticeship, went to work I went to work as sales for Equinity data. Did 6 months there, went to a marketing agency, and then I started my business.
Wow, Liam, that's so inspiring. And I think one of the biggest things I love about what you shared there is what I've noticed through people who've come on the show is there's usually someone who's like what I would call course corrected. You know, we're on a journey, and usually there's someone that comes up in our life that course corrects us and helps us make a transition. You mentioned that you didn't think he knew the impact of that he had on you. Was it like an immediate thing for you where that getting that job like changed everything? Or was it sort of a thing looking back now? You see that was the defining moment.
It's looking back. Like when I was there, I almost took that job for granted, which is really sad. Like I tried my hardest, like as I do with anything, but it was a sales job. I was 17, 18. I can't remember it exactly. I thought I was like a Wolf of Wall Street sort of guy. I was like trying to wear the suit. I was trying to have the like pen. Like I remember my first paycheck, right? I just went and bought a new iPhone out front. Like I was getting like £800 a month, like apprentice money. I spent 700 on an iPhone and like the rest on a coat. And it's stuff like that. Like I thought I was bigger than I was. If I had the opportunity to go back to that, I would like definitely work harder for him, because like looking back now, he changed my life. Like I wouldn't know where to go. I wouldn't know what to do. And like anyone who says they make it on their own, I think are like lying. I think you always need people to like give you advice and push you.
Now, I just wanted to quickly interrupt this episode to share a quick message with you. Now, I've been hosting these interviews with Inspired by Show for a while now, and I've been loving all of the great feedback from our listeners. And it really means a lot when you all share from listening to these episodes, watching these episodes, share your incredible feedback. And I love that you love it as much as we do. Now, my mission for the Inspired by Show is to inspire others to challenge the norm, share their story, knowing that it's okay to be vulnerable and, shock horror, take the mask off and be raw and real. So I have a favour to ask. Can you help me on this mission by sharing this episode with someone who you think needs to hear this message? Maybe there's a friend, a loved one, a colleague, or someone that you know that would really benefit from hearing this inspiring story. If you could do that to help us, help even more people to challenge the norm and push themselves out of their own comfort zone, then I'd really appreciate it. So if you haven't already, share this episode with a friend, a loved one, a colleague, or someone that you know would benefit. Now, back to the episode.
Into something.
Yeah, I totally agree. I hear the phrase, self-made millionaire or self-made success, and I don't agree with it at all. I think it's a load of rubbish, because when actually, like you say, there's always somebody that's helped you on the journey. Now, you mentioned there that you felt like you didn't really appreciate it at the time, and the money was just going on, let's say tangible things, iPhones, jackets, and so on. But you mentioned earlier that that doesn't really drive you. So when did that change? When did you then stop looking at the sort of material things with your journey?
That's one I've never thought about. Because it does. Like I always think of my life like now, but yeah, I just said then looking back, I would go and spend my money. Where did it change? I think it was that year, because I remember the place I was staying. Like I was living for free. Like the government were sort of paying for it because of the care system. But I think they turned around to me and went, "Actually, you're earning money. You've got to pay rent now, like half of what you're earning." And I think that was a big wake up, having to actually like pay rent, like adult stuff. But then, even that year, I always wanted things. It was weird. I think I was just trying to fill something I felt I missed out on for the last sort of few years of my life.
Mm.
But I think I matured, grew up, and realized that things don't actually make you happy. Memories. I'm a big fan of memories. Like, if I had the opportunity to buy a Ferrari or go on holiday to like Malaga, if that's like all I could afford, all right, the price difference a bit like different, but you know
Yeah.
what I mean? I'd 100% choose to go on a holiday with my girlfriend
Mm.
because the memory is more lasting than the car.
Definitely. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You mentioned there about usually what I found is a lot of people that go through, you know, alcohol or drugs or any sort of addiction, if you will, or connection to something. Like for me, it's like same sort of thing. It was like I used to buy and invest in things because I felt like I was filling a hole. What hole were you trying to fill at that point? What would you find that it was like distracting you from or filling for you?
I was really depressed. Like, I say it was like the happiest time of my life, but again, it was the worst time. Like, in a space of 2 years, I'd like lost the people who brought me up. Like, I had to move, so I lost friends. And like, even the place in Plymouth, it wasn't a great place. All right, it wasn't a mosque side, it wasn't people getting stabbed, killed, but there was still violence. Like, a guy I lived with is now in jail for killing his girlfriend. So it's still not a
Yeah.
nice place to be around. And I was like really, really lonely. I was really depressed. And like my girlfriend at the time was like very unfaithful. She was cheating a lot. And like I remember one of the time I almost died from drugs. I took a legal high called like Pandora's box. It's because I got a Snapchat off a guy who was like sleeping with my girlfriend, and he sent it to me. And I opened it. I was like, what? So I just Pandora's box through a bong, jumped out, and I was like, I don't know if you've ever done it. I would
Mm.
definitely never recommend doing it. It was the worst experience ever. It felt made you feel like you die. You know when you die, they say you see like 7 minutes of your life. I was
Mm.
like feeling that, and somehow I jumped out of the top window of like a 3-story place. Didn't break anything miraculously, and just
Wow.
like landed on a street. And then I woke up by an ambulance. Like, yeah.
Wow. It's quite incredible when you think about it. Like, I'm a massive believer in when things happen, they happen. But actually, if things are meant to happen differently, they will. Like, we usually have something that changes us, something that, like, a moment where we have to sort of wake up and go, holy shit, this, I can't carry on like this. I'm curious for you, Liam. You're in this care environment. Yeah, okay, you've got the job and things are looking up, but you're still in the same physical environment. There are things that maybe aren't going your way. Like you said, living with someone that's, in prison now. Was there ever a moment where you're like, is this me? Did you ever feel like you didn't fit in, or were there times where you're like,
No,
this is where I need to
I
be?
was always different. I
Mm.
like, I always, when I was like, when I was like 16, I was always like misguided. But somehow I managed to be like really strong the older I got and like control my
Mm.
thoughts and my sort of. So like I would never hang around these people. Like, all right, you live with them, you see them, but I would make sure like I go out on a train and go to like Exeter and just stay there in a park to be away from them because I was always scared that maybe I could go down the wrong path, but like didn't know how it would like end. I don't know
Mm.
what would have happened.
Yeah, yeah. It's quite interesting how we can be tempted by other people as well, right? Where, it's like, I don't want to hang around with those people. Like, one of the reasons why I personally have never done drugs is because I've got a very addictive personality. And I very much like, oh God, what if? It's almost too tempting, the fear of what could happen. I'm curious for you, when did this start to change? Was it a sudden thing where you're like, I'm changing my life, this is not going to happen to me anymore? Or was it a gradual thing that you kind of slowly grew out of?
The biggest change was that moment where like I thought I was dead. I thought I jumped out of I did jump out of a 3-story building. That I like not anymore, but I like occasionally did weed after that. Like it's so weird because I never actually get addicted to anything. Like I've smoked a lot, but I can stop like that. Like it's always a choice for me.
Mm.
And okay, there are addicts, I'm sure, but from personal experience, I've never been addicted. Like weed, I smoke it because I enjoyed it. That
Mm.
was a choice. Maybe I'm proud, maybe I'm not.
Mm.
I don't regret it, but it was still a choice. But I could stop it like that. It,
Mm.
so, but yeah, falling out of that window is definitely a changing moment
Wow.
where I was like, "Nah, I can't do drugs anymore. I've had my wake up call."
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was going through your mind at that point? So, like, you wake up in the ambulance from the hospital. What were you
I woke
thinking?
up on the floor with and I don't know what it is, but I have a photo of just like things strapped to my chest. I don't know what they were. I never actually asked, but I do remember ringing my dad for like the first time ever saying, "I'm really sorry. I love you." Because I thought I
Wow.
was dying.
My God. What did he say?
He was shocked. My dad's very like old school. Like he loves my brother, for example, to pieces. Like they get on so well. He will never say I love you. Like
Mm.
and that's really sad. Like from kids who just need love from their dad. But he's like really old school. It's how his dad brought him up, unfortunately. So yeah.
Yeah. My parents are exactly the same. Even now, only in the last couple of years do my parents now, if I don't say it on the phone, they're like, love you. And a couple of times it's caught me by surprise. I'm like, oh, okay. And, if they listen to this, I know they love me anyway. It's just like they all showed love differently.
Yeah.
Like you say, it's how they've been brought up.
Yeah.
So you're lying on this floor. You've just had this big wake up call. What was your thought process then to actually start changing things?
I think the fear of death.
Mm.
Like I realized like I never cared about death before that. Now I'm petrified of it. Like like before that I would never care. Like it never crossed my
Mm.
mind. And then when I thought I like died, I was like, shit, this life is like so precious and like
Mm.
so valuable. And I am wasting it around these people doing these things and I just want to change. So I just obviously look, it wasn't overnight. I thought it straight away, but it took like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to like really start to change.
Mm.
But I think that was like the biggest wake up call being, and now still to this day, I remember that and I'm like, nah, I'm not dying to, I'm so careful in what I do. Like I'll always choose a really sensible seat on an aeroplane. Like, if an
Mm.
aeroplane crashes, you can't do anything. But in my mind, it's like you've chosen the back seat, you're more likely to survive. I'll always sit at like the middle of a train because I'm just scared of like death now.
Wow. Yeah. Would you say it's because you've been, in your eyes, closer to it? Like you've had that almost like saving moment of like your life was saved because you didn't die jumping out of that window, which, let's be honest, like you say, miraculous.
Well, I could have. Like, I never actually asked what happened, but waking up with like heart things, maybe I did. Maybe my heart did stop.
Mm.
I don't actually know. It was a weird. I just remember blacking out, woke up on the floor. I watched the CCTV and I was like fully awake, but I wasn't. So it was like really weird.
Mm.
Um, but yeah.
Wow. And so what then happened next? So, you've gone through this, you've changed, like you said, 3, 4 weeks time, you've then started putting the changes in place. How did you then come to the Liam that's sat here, which obviously we'll talk about, the football career, the football pieces in there, the investments, you do a lot of business investing now, you've got your own businesses. Like, to me, it seems like a whole different Liam.
I've always been like driven. I've always wanted to like the end goal is never fame for me. Like
Mm.
and I'm not famous. I'm not saying that, but it's never will be fame. It will be always creating value and like adding value. So like with my business, I started that because I was working for a marketing agency after I left the apprenticeship. I um I was doing all the work, getting paid like peanuts for it. This is probably where my big head came in again. I'm like, you deserve more than you're getting. Um And they actually paid me 1 month underpaid, and then they didn't pay me the second month. They were a really dodgy company. So I was like, nah, I'm just gonna try and take all their clients because I'm doing all the work anyway. They know me, they trust me. Luckily, half of them said yes. So that gave me the ability to do that. They weren't that happy, this agency, but they went bust like 2 months later. So I
Wow.
don't know if that's my fault. I don't wanna say it's my fault, but I've heard stories that they don't pay staff, so hopefully
Yeah.
it's not my fault.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then I just grew from there, brought a business partner on, and it just went like uphill from there. And then COVID came around and then it went downhill. But now it's gone uphill again.
Wow. So how did you decide what business to start? Was it because you were working in that marketing agency?
this is where my big head comes in again. The boss at this place gave off a very, and he isn't wealthy, and I should have seen it, but being a young guy, thinking someone else is really rich, like he had a car on finance, he was trying to be something he
Mm.
clearly wasn't because the business wasn't doing well. I thought, oh, I can do this. I'm inspired by his wealth, by the things he's got, things he's saying he's got. I'm inspired by this. And then he introduced me to Stephen Bartlett, Social Chain, like because he was doing a vlog at the time. I don't know if you remember, but Stephen Bartlett was doing like a vlog by his
Mm.
marketing agency. I was like, this looks cool. And that's sort of the success I thought I wanted to achieve. So that's
Mm.
why I left.
Wow. When did you find out that he wasn't as wealthy as you thought he was?
Probably when it went bust. Like,
Mm.
well, to be fair, I still thought he was. I still thought he was up until he went bust. Loads of stories came out in the papers in Exeter that he didn't pay staff, that he robbed clients' money, all that sort of stuff. And now he's just working a normal job. So now, like last year,
Wow, it's like roles reversed then. So
yeah,
you're now the business owner and
yeah.
he's not. Now, question for you. We were talking about this a little bit off camera, and one of my pet peeves is in the I guess you could call it online world, but in the world of building a personal brand, there are a lot of people that say they have money and don't. There are a lot of people that take the photos of fancy cars and the expensive handbags or watches, and they take photos in Harrods or something like that, but actually they can't really afford it. What's been your experience of building a brand? Because you have met some very wealthy individuals. We'll talk about that later on, but what's your experience of that?
I never pretend that I'm someone I'm not. I've always kept my identity. Like this month, I'm struggling. Look, I say struggling. I'm not like going on the streets, but I
Mm,
have to sort of watch my money this month.
mm,
But then some months it does like really well. So it's always like a balance. I find some guests claim that they're wealthier than they are because they've had levels of fame. Like my
mm,
partner's a professional singer, and like I know the struggles. I know that TV pays fuck all.
mm,
I know this. So when someone comes and is like, "Oh, I made thousands and thousands from a TV show," I'm like, "No, you didn't. You
mm.
just didn't. Unless you're like Ant Deck and you've got a 4-year contract or something, you didn't. You make money after it. You build a brand, right? You make sod all for TV show, but you like build a brand, and then you can obviously what most of them are doing are flogging pointless products to their audience for 800 quid posts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the thing I think with the world we live in now, though, where there's so much more visibility. It almost makes people look that they have to be famous, they have to have money, they have to be successful. And actually, what looks like success isn't success. You've also been in the football world, so I'm sure you've met a few famous footballers where, arguably there's a lot more wealth in football than in a lot of influencing and personal branding. I'm curious, we haven't talked about your journey into football yet. I know we talked a little bit off camera. Where did football come into your journey, and what was the reason you were attracted to football?
So before 2010, I never actually liked football. Like I was in primary school that year, I think, or just going into secondary. I can't really remember. And I remember, I vividly remember someone asking, "What team do you support?" I knew no teams. I just went England. They're like, "Now, what team do you support?" I went England. They're like, "No, you got to support a team like Man United, Chelsea." And I just randomly said Chelsea. I never heard of Chelsea. I can't lie.
Spoiler.
Yeah, I don't support Chelsea now, by the way. I support Exeter City. But then the World Cup came around. This was shortly before the World Cup, so they must have been like getting hyped
Mm,
for it. And then the 2010 World Cup in South Africa came around, and I like really liked it. I was like, this is exciting. Like I watched the first game. I was like, why are people just 22 men chasing a ball around a field trying to
mm,
kick it in the goal? I was like, what the hell is this? And I was like, actually, this is really exciting. And then I watched it, and then luckily, because I'm a referee now, luckily Howard Webb, who's an English referee, refereed the World Cup final. And like everyone was watching it. My parents hate football, but they turned it on. So like everyone watches it. And I was like, that guy's the center of attention here. This guy showed like 15 yellow cards and a red. This guy is like the attention. I like the attention. I want a referee. So then I just applied, and parents obviously paid for the course, and
mm.
yeah.
Wow. I love that. Like, it's just such a powerful thing about perspective, right? Because for me, I never ever notice referees in games. Like, I'm not a massive football supporter. My partner is. He's like, God forbid his team Real Madrid lose, which luckily doesn't happen all that
Is he
often. But
Spanish?
still, no, he's French, but he's obsessed with Real Madrid. That's a whole nother story for a whole nother day. But he is. It is like our house. We in our old house used to have a fireplace, and it changed color. Had to be blue when Real Madrid were playing. Like, he's so superstitious. So I never really knew much about football. I certainly didn't notice the refs. So
Why
I love
doesn't
the
he
fact that
support Paris?
he's just not into French football
Really?
at all. Doesn't
I've
support.
reffed at Paris before.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow. I
yeah.
love that. What was that like?
Yeah, that's one I just wanted to throw in there. I don't know if you could
Yeah.
tell. That was like surreal. Like, wow. I've
Really?
never, like the setup, like you walk in, it just feels like a studio, like a set. Like it's wow. Yeah, and then you walk out, obviously, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's remarkable.
How
That's
did you go from, like, let's just zoom out. So you've done this referee training. Now you're refereeing in Paris. Like, how does someone go from the idea of seeing a ref on the TV and going, I want to be like that ref, to refereeing?
I
I
don't
mean,
ref like consistently Paris games, by the
no,
way.
but
I'm
you've
not.
refed some
Yeah,
massive
well,
games,
yeah,
some big games.
yeah. I've done like Plymouth Argyle, Fulham, Millwall. So yeah. Oh, it's a long journey. People don't see the work that goes into refereeing at all. Like refs get slaughtered, like slagged
That's
off
what I mean.
all the
Yeah.
time. Like you get to a certain level, it's really easy, but then after that, you get observers on like every game, and they criticize every single bit you do, like your positioning, like your like showing a yellow card technique, like every single thing, like where you are when you walk out. You've got to walk to the right place. Like they look at everything, so it's not easy.
Do you know what I'm noticing though, Lim? I'm noticing a theme because with your podcast, with everything you've done, you're always, there is elements of being criticized and being monitored, if you will. Like, we're both in the podcast world. There are people that listen to the podcast and go, oh, that was a shit question, or that wasn't the best angle, or now that guest was rubbish. You know, it sounds to me like refereeing is quite similar, right? People are quite critical. Some people like it, some people don't. You know, there's a bit of controversy, hence coming back down to the disruption side of things. How have you handled that in both careers?
Me and my partner argue quite a bit. And I said to her yesterday, because we hadn't argued all of yesterday. They're not like proper arguments. And I went, can you just have a go at me a minute? Can you just like criticize me or call me some names? And I don't know what it is, but it gives me some sort of stimulation, like a little bit of a buzz that, and I'm a firm believer that if you're being criticized, it's either, I'm not saying her, it's either because they're jealous or like, or you're doing something right. So like, that's always been like in my brain. So like when no one else is criticizing me, I ask my partner to do it. So it's like, I know that sounds super weird and people will think that is super weird. So you can criticize all you want. But like, that's how I feel. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like you need to be criticized to win. And people who criticize with actual value help you. Because if someone says, oh, I don't like that angle. Yeah, it's a criticism. But you could then go, actually, they are watching. So you could change that angle. Oh, I don't like those shoes. Okay, that's fine. Let's find the one where they do.
Yeah, totally. It's about how you use the criticism, isn't it? And not taking it personal, but using it to fuel you. Like, I've done that with loads. I'm a speaker. I speak on loads of events and stages. You can't impress everyone. Like, people that speak on stage and want to be a speaker that 100% of the room love, you're never going to win. Right. And it's about knowing who you want to work with, who you want to like you, and whether it's actually an opinion that you care about. Now, I want to go into your podcasting career. So, you know, it sounds like you've been on quite a journey, Liam, and like you openly mentioned earlier, this is the first time you've shared your story on a podcast. How come you haven't used your own podcast to share your story?
So I do. So I do. Whatever you want to take from it. So I was doing it virtually a year ago, and the first 3 were my story. They are shocking episodes. I would never recommend ever checking them out. I don't know why they're still up there, but apparently it's good to keep them up as a sort of to look back. The issue we have is like I'm very clever. Like I throw things in about my sort of journey. So I'll throw in one thing I've learned is the education system's broken. I never went to education, blah, blah, blah. And I'll throw that in and I'll use that on social media and it does really well. But the episodes aren't about me. And that's like the balance. Like, since we took it in person, I did try and do that. And people were like, you're making it about you. This isn't about you. So I had to be like really careful. But I throw things in there. But it's like, it's really hard.
Yeah. It's because I think a lot of podcasts, they're not falling in love with the host. They want to listen for the guest.
Yeah, we had this is where this came, one of the main reasons I didn't do this. We had Harvey Armstrong come on. And I always check out people's podcasts before to see like what they've talked about. And the top comment on one of it was like, in the end, it was just Harvey interviewing the podcaster. And I was like, yeah, this is something we can never, ever be like. Because it's not our stories. Like, we benefit through collaborations and audience. And I've always been open with that. I'm like, you get to share your story. I get to grow new audiences through collaborations. I've never hidden that. Like, that's what it's about, right?
Yeah.
Like, you wouldn't do it if you didn't get to like tap into other audiences.
Always. Yeah.
Like, and I'll always say that.
That's one thing I really value though, Liam, about you is since we first connected, we're both very honest and we're both very raw and real, you know, like opening up about financial situations or, you know, challenges in your childhood. A lot of people don't go there and share. And I love that you have, because I'm an oversharer. I will always overshare. And then at times my team say to me, Chloe, you probably didn't need to go that level of raw and real.
Yeah.
Which is the reason I created this show, because I want people to be able to be raw and real, take the mask off, leave it at the door, see what we talk about.
That would be a good name.
Yeah, what, raw and real?
Raw and real, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we'll see.
Never thought about it.
Do you know what? It wasn't part of the plan. Like when we created Inspired By, my book publishing company is called Inspired By Publishing.
Right.
So it was connected to that. And then the whole point of the show, now I'm doing what you said not to do, which is tell your story on your own podcast.
Crack on.
The whole point of the show was a lot of our authors have inspiring stories. So it was like, hang on, now let's speak about it. Come on the show. And then it just kind of grew from there. Everyone started being raw and real and just being really open, like you did. Like, came on, you're like, wasn't expecting to get teary. I wasn't expecting to share my whole story. It just kind of happened. And I love that with the podcast though. I don't know, have you ever had a moment where you've reflected on your podcast and you're like, God, I didn't expect that to happen. Didn't expect the podcast to go in that direction, maybe?
When it was online, no. Like, I think I was just doing it because maybe like Stephen Bartlett was doing it. Jordan, Wills Williamson. What's his name? Chris Williamson. I think he was like doing it. And like, I always listened to podcasts. I've always liked podcasts. And I was like, yeah, I've got to copy and do a podcast. It's the way forward. So I did. And it did okay. Like better than I thought it was. Because no one gives a shit about like Riverside production anymore. Let's be real. Like, you've got to post on like YouTube Shorts and on TikTok, and no one cares if it's a shitty Riverside production. So I was like, this is not gonna go anywhere. So like, when an episode did like really well, I was like, oh wow. But then I went in person, and I, like, with the guests we lined up, like we spoke about like backlogging. We recorded like 5 really good guests, ones we knew would do well, who came on a year ago, luckily. So like Nadia Essex was one of them, who I will recommend for your show. She'll be like my guest recommendation, and that like blew up, and I knew it would because she came on a year ago and it did well on Riverside, and that like did really well. And then Harvey Armstrong did well, and then a Love Islander did well, and then all of that. And now it's disappointing when an episode doesn't do well, because like, you have these highs and then one doesn't do well. But like I said, I listen to like so many podcasts, and I find like there's so much bullshit. Like, these hosts are such like bullshitters. Like, people are like, why do you do podcast? Not to me, but like, why do you do podcasting? Oh, because I like the stories. I like talking to people. I'm like, yeah, you do. Let's talk about the real reason, which is you can tap to their audience, grow through their audience, and keep doing the podcast. Then you can go and get sponsorships. Like, let's be honest here.
Yeah.
Like, these stories are cool. Like, I've listened to some of yours and they are cool. But like, there's always business at the back of your mind, isn't there?
Yeah.
And same with me.
Yeah. Or do you know what? Interesting thing is, if there isn't, there could be. I think that's the biggest thing. We had Spencer Lodge on the show, and he's such an incredible business owner, runs a fantastic charity to end human trafficking in Dubai. Like, it's so inspiring. And he came in the studio and was so great on the show. And then at the end was like, off camera, was like, Chloe, how are you monetizing this? Like, why don't you try this? You should do this. And just gave so much free advice. It was unreal.
How are you monetizing this?
Great question. At the moment, we're focusing mainly on attracting really cool authors for the publishing.
Okay.
We do have some ads that people may have heard, which is more to do with us growing our brand. I don't know how I feel about people monetizing podcasts and doing sponsorships. I don't know. I would love to do that because at the moment it's very much through the publishing business, which I love. But I do also want to keep the raw aspect of it and not over promoted. What's your thoughts on that?
So we have 2 sponsors. One is consistent. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the turmeric company. They're like a turmeric shop. And I use them religiously through football. Like up until now, I never got them for free. Like, I always bought it. And then I was like, actually, why the hell haven't I reached out? And then I like researched them. I was like, shit, the founders, Thomas Howardson Kanu, who like plays for Wales. So I like messaged him on LinkedIn. He's like, I'd love to come on your podcast. Here's my marketing manager. I was like, actually, why aren't I trying to get them to sponsor? So now they like sponsor the podcast. Not yet, but like in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And they just like send us loads of free turmeric shots. And I'm like,
Wow.
actually, that was a great idea because I use them. The amount of like sponsorships I see of people like trying to flog like really shitty clothing and like, which are clearly getting paid like 100, 200 quid. It's not even worth it.
No.
It will fuck our audience.
Yeah.
And like they trust us at the moment. Like, they know I use turmeric shots because I referee. So like, and it's not like shit quality either. It's like really good. And most people in sports have heard of it.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go and wear like a really crappy t-shirt for 100 quid. It's not
No.
worth it.
That's the whole point though. And I think for me, I see a lot of people go for sponsorship on their podcast more because they need the money rather than they value the products. Like, for me, I would be happily sponsored if anybody's listening to this or watching this and wants to sponsor the show, do reach out. But I would happily be sponsored if it's a product or service I would use. I have had people say to me, how much does it cost to come on your podcast? And I've said, tell me about your story. Let's have a chat and we'll see if it's a good fit. I wouldn't accept the money though, because to me, no, because as soon as someone pays to come on the podcast, it's a business transaction. And I'll be thinking, shit, I need to make sure, Liam, you have a great episode because you're going to want the footage.
But also, why are they paying?
Exactly.
Why?
They might not need to pay if it's a really good story. And for me, I know we say like, we obviously do this because we love it and what comes from it, but I love meeting people. I love speaking to people.
If
and
you
I
have a
love,
good story, you're not paying.
No, exactly. And also, if they are paying, they have a really shit advisor because you shouldn't need to pay if your story is good and you can tell it in the right way, which is part of my publishing business.
Never heard that one.
I've had a good, I'd say at least a handful since I launched. Yeah. And we only launched in June.
I don't actually deal with the inquiries, so we might have done.
Yeah.
And I've always said we'll never pay minus expenses. That's fair enough. If someone's coming from like Birmingham, we'll cover that.
Yeah.
But yeah, now maybe we do get inquiries for some really small people to like paid to come on. I don't know. I might have to check.
You never know. Question for you. You mentioned there that you've had some big guests. How did you start getting your guests? What process did you follow and what advice would you give to any podcasters listening?
So my first big guest was Nadia Essex. And like, I went on, like, she came on a year ago when it was virtual, so it wasn't really as good as it's doing now. And I messaged her going, hey, Nadia, do you want to like come on the podcast? She was on Celebs Go Dating. And she went, yeah. I was like, what? This girl with like 200,000 followers who's actually engaged, like she is engaged. She gets like 150,000 views a video. I was like, shit. Okay. Yeah, come on. So I already had like her contact and I had her number then. She gave me her number. And when I took it into person, I was like, why aren't I getting Nadia back on? Like, she'll be the first. And like that one did really well, like blew. And then obviously people see that, her followers see that because she's well connected. And when they like it, I think if you message them, it doesn't go to spam or something if they're like Instagram sees it's mutually connected. So I messaged them. A lot of them got back to me. I was like, shit, fair enough. And And now we're like really selective. Like sometimes we have weeks where that's why we do a backlog where we are like, shit, we haven't got a guest. Shit. Which is why we keep a backlog, which is something I do believe in. I know you don't as much, but I certainly do. But they will always be like a backlog, and they know that. Like, and they will get released. But if someone really interesting says, "Oh, I'm coming on," prioritize.
Of course it is, because again, it's a business
Yeah,
at the end
it
of the
is.
day.
I've never tried to hide that.
No, and that's what I think is so valuable, Liam, is you're so honest. I'm a very honest person. Like, I'll say the same to our guests. I'm like, guys, when is this due? Like, one of our episodes that has just come out was we filmed with my business partner, Tanya Grant. She's an amazing human being, such a powerful episode. She's a business partner of mine. And so she was totally responsive to us leaving it a couple of months, because I was like,
I hope I don't have to wait a few months.
We'll see. We'll see. But if we're recording this, I'm actually seriously recording this in June. And if it comes out later, no, I'm kidding. We're recording it in end of October. So this will be out soon. No. Yeah, 2024. So question for you, Liam. You've interviewed quite a few interesting people. Who has been your favourite podcast guest that you've had on, and why?
See, now I would feel inclined to say Nadia Essex because she was the biggest. But I don't think she was my favourite. She was my favourite in terms of the numbers. Like, she's the reason I got monetized on YouTube. So thank you, Nadia. She's like the reason so many more big guests came on. My favourite. When's this going out?
This will go out probably, I would probably say about mid to end of November.
Okay. So I spoke to someone a few weeks ago. So like today, but like a few weeks ago for your narrative, who was on like the BBC Apprentice. And I was like, oh, she's going to come in. She's going to be like a real arsehole. And I said this to her. I thought you'd be an arsehole. And she came in and she started crying. She was like, when I was growing up, I was racially abused. I went through so much shit. My mum was Jamaican. She was racially abused. People were like, why are you black? So her best friend went, it's okay that you're black. She was like, yeah, I know it is. And she gave me a story that I was like, shit. No one's ever seen that side of her, because she comes across as, she calls herself the Kim Kardashian of business, like on The Apprentice, which I thought was quite cringe. And I told her that, but, yeah, she just comes across as this like really tough, ferocious woman. And then turns out she's got these traumas, these insecurities that I didn't think she would have, which is out maybe a few weeks ago, depending when this is out.
Yeah. We'll make sure we can include the link in the show notes. It's like listening to the trailer. I'm so excited. I think the good thing is, though, sometimes it's not the people you expect, is it? Like, I won't say who, but I've had some guests where I'm like, this is going to be such a good episode. And then I'm interviewing them and I'm like, I don't feel like I'm getting the wow, because I don't know about you as a host, but I know if I'm getting the wow, I'm like, this is going to be good. You feel it 100%.
Like this conversation, most of our episodes are an hour. This one went on for like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And I know we need to cut it down, but which is sad. But you're like, shit, I was here for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And you didn't get bored. Like I said, I have ADHD, so sometimes I like fidget. And my producer or girlfriend always says, yeah, you weren't enjoying that conversation because it's so visible.
Yeah.
But like, I was really intrigued by it. But yeah, the ones that surprised me was Diego Day. I don't know if you've ever seen him. He was like called the Rizz God.
No.
Are you on TikTok?
Yeah.
I'm surprised. He goes up to women in the streets and tries to pull them.
Really? Oh my God, I need to find this.
Yeah, he's cool. But he was I like the guy. I'll say that. But he was a tough cookie.
Really?
He watches videos and you can tell he has these struggles, but he just won't let himself be broken.
Yeah.
And it was like really tough to break.
It's hard, isn't it?
It's sad. So like watch his videos. He's exactly like that on and off camera. But I think it's a mask.
Yeah.
And I told him this. I think it's a mask. I think he's trying to hide some insecurities, because that's what I used to do.
Most people do. And I think you come on podcasts, and we've said this from day one, like me and my team, but podcasting is a really intimate experience. Like, I used to also interview people on stages before I started podcasts. So people being interviewed on stage, if there was like a live audience here, people often feel different.
I'd struggle with that.
Really?
If this was in front of like a live audience now, I'd really struggle.
Wow.
But like I forgot the cameras are here,
Yeah, yeah.
and I'm just like looking at you, and I'm just telling,
Mm,
and like yeah, it's crazy. But
yeah.
if it was a live audience with like you can hear people like or like
Yeah.
clapping or whatever, you're like
Yeah.
I'd
It
watch
feels
what I'd
weird.
say.
It totally feels weird. And so that's why I love it in the studio, because it feels a bit more intimate, feels a bit more chatty. Like I literally feel like we could be having a cup of coffee or a cup of tea right now and having a catch up with a friend. You know, that's what I love about podcasting. But a lot of people come on and they don't expect to take the mask off. And I'm a massive believer in either take it off or it's going to get cracked at some stage,
Yeah.
because we're going to talk and you'd rather be in control of it than not. You know, you'd rather be ready for it than not.
He's gonna get called out. And he already is. He already is. People are commenting, saying stuff
Really?
on his Instagram, and he is. I wish I like I have sort of regret because I'm very good at like breaking people, which is not my goal. But
You will cry.
yeah,
You will cry.
I always ask people before, can you cry for me? I think
Do you
that's
know how
what
to fake tear? Yeah,
I think
fake
that's
cry.
what Stephen Bartlett must do. But I was like, I'm gonna be the one to break him. And unfortunately I wasn't.
Yeah.
Episodes still did well because obviously a lot of young kids curious about how to pull women,
Yeah.
which isn't real. And then I called him out on actually, how many have said no to you? And he's like,
Yeah.
well, actually loads. I'm like, why are you not sharing that? He's
Yeah.
like, well, it's not good content. I'm like, it's not, but it's teaching young boys that they can be like pushy and rapey towards women.
Which is horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good for you. Yeah.
He didn't like that.
No, I didn't think you would. I'm dying to see the episode now. I'm
Yeah.
dying to see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liam. That's so I honestly feel like we could talk for ages. I've got one more quick question before we continue on to the final part of the interview. Let's say, you know, you look back at Liam going through the adoption, care homes, you know, losing your parents who now became your family and your friends and so on, and going through all this whole journey. What would you say to anyone that's maybe struggling at the moment in the care system or struggling at home with families and friends? What would you say to them to like give them a bit of hope?
It is weird because I am asked this quite a bit. I don't know if I'm like lucky because I'm really strong. I see a lot of people in the system go down the wrong path, and I've never been able to figure out why. Like, yeah, I was in there and I was choosing to do things, but I could so easily choose not to, and I did. So I don't get why they're not. And I'm not a psychologist, or I think that's the right word. I'm not a psychologist, so I can't understand people's brains, and I never have been able to. I just know from like my point of view, you can always like choose to do something. Like I chose to start a business. Don't know if it was the wrong one. Like the amount of times I've messed up, like loads. Like I got sent back into a care home. Like I messed up loads. It was my own choice. It was like my own fault. I'm not ashamed of that. I would rather like fail a million times and succeed once than ever try. And I think anyone in care home can choose to change. I know it doesn't like feel like they can, but they can.
Wow. That's such an inspiring message, because I think a lot of people, I've personally never been through that, but there's been times where I have felt like at the depths, you know, really dark and so on, which we won't go into now. But it was realizing I had a choice as well. I think in times of darkness, a lot of people feel like they don't have a way out, they don't have a choice. And the one thing I would say to people is you always have a choice. It doesn't feel like it, but there is always a choice, and you took that choice.
And I think everyone's struggles are different. Like your struggles will probably be totally different than mine. I'm not here to say they're not struggles. I'm not here to say they're worse than me because you only know what you've been through. So like in our minds, again, not a psychologist, but they are probably as painful struggles because like I've been through X, you've been through X, but I don't know what you've been through. And like until you experience something worse, that feels like the worst you can have.
Does, doesn't it? Yeah. And every lesson uncovers new journeys, right? Like one of my good friends, Shim, always says, new level, new devil. You know, every time we go through something, we learn something, and then the mountain's a bit higher the next one. New level, new devil.
No, I don't like that.
You don't like
I
it?
don't like that.
What about it you don't like?
Well, for me, what it sounds like is like every new step you go through is a new devil. I do disagree with that. I think you can have like 5 devils, but then a what's like the opposite of devil? Like
An angel?
An angel, but then an angel. So
Yeah.
I disagree, and it sounds a
Yeah.
bit cringe.
Yeah, it does. It does sound
sound
cringe. It does sound cringe. What I took from it was that in every new experience, you might get, it's like doing a video game, right? Like you work really hard, you finally get to the end boss, you think you've won, and then you go up to the next level and there's something new to deal with. They might not always show up as devils. They might show up as successes. And then suddenly, you know, like wealthy people have problems too, right? It's like sometimes you think you're going to win. There are still challenges to learn from. The way I look at it is it's always about learning. As long as I'm always learning, then I'm happy. It's about trying new things.
Well, yeah, when you say it like that, that's a different
Very different. But everyone takes it differently, right? Yeah.
Like you say it initially, you are going to think something.
Yeah, definitely.
Naturally.
Question for you then, before we wrap up. What would you say has been your biggest lesson through all of the challenges that you've had to today?
Jesus. I don't know. Biggest lesson. I don't know. Like I never think about it like that. Like I don't just have big lessons. Every day is a lesson in something else. Like I call it like little steps, little lessons. Like I've never looked back and gone, that was actually a big lesson I learned. Like you learn big stuff like how to start a business and stuff like that. But like in terms of what I've done, well, no, that's a lie, because every day you learn little things on how to run a business. So I don't like that question.
Good. Love that. What little lesson has had an impact then? Is there any one like piece of advice someone's given you or something like that?
Yeah, always treat everyone the same. You never know who's going to help you. And like, yeah, always treat everyone the same. Like today I was having a really shit morning and I rung the buzzer for an office I was going into and it wouldn't answer. And I shouldn't admit this. And this was humiliating for me and my producer. And it went to like, I didn't realize, but it goes through to a voicemail. And I was like, fucking hell, these pricks don't answer. And she's like, it's on voicemail. I was like, and like I still get really annoyed with things, but like you should always treat everyone with respect. And that's a lesson I learned today, because now they heard it and I'm quite embarrassed.
It's like that moment when you want the ground to swallow you up. You're like, oh, can I just delete that? How do I delete
I was
that?
having such a long morning as well, and like I shouldn't have frustrated. I was like, fucking hell, I paid to use this and they're not letting me in, and it's normal frustration. But now that, and I never thought about it. Admittedly, I didn't know anyone would hear it.
Yeah.
Don't know if that changes it, but I was like, what if this business person hears this now and is like negatively impacted by like what I just said?
Yeah.
And today was a lesson. That was my lesson today.
Yeah, love that. I think it's really important though to see that there's always lessons in every day and we're always learning, right? No one's ever perfect. If they say they are, it's bullshit. Rubbish, isn't it? Yeah, absolute bullshit. Well, Liam, it's been awesome talking to you. As I said, I feel like I could chat to you way longer and I would love to go further into your story, but we are completely out of time now.
I know. And now we have to, not have to, we are recording your one.
Yeah, to come on your podcast. So,
same studio.
Yeah, love that. Different images. When you guys see that, it'll be very different.
We might release it same time.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Now, final question for you, which I always ask the guests, our final question. Who do you know that has an inspiring story that you think we should have on the show next?
I think Nadia Essex would be great for your story, for your podcast, not necessarily because of the story. It is inspiring, but she'd be very good to collaborate with.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Liam, for that suggestion. And you bigged her up so much. I'm excited to
she's amazing. I'll give you her number.
Thank you.
I'll ask
so
her
much.
first, but I'll give you her number.
Awesome. Oh, well, Liam, that's been awesome. Thank you for
so
coming
much.
here. So, guys, that is all we have time for now. I hope you guys have enjoyed that as much as I have. Liam's story is so inspiring. If there's any of you that are struggling at the moment or you're going through something, take what Liam said seriously. Every day is a lesson and every day is an opportunity for you to learn. So what are you going to take from it? And you always have a choice. Now, I'm dying to know, those of you guys that are watching on our YouTube channel, make sure you comment in the comments. What has been your biggest takeaway from Liam's interview on the show today? And don't forget, if you're listening on any of the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else, or on our YouTube and you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe now so you don't miss our next inspiring guest next week. See you next week.